So every morning I write in my journal and I read from this book that my father gave me. I read it every morning, and it's a book that was put together by Leo Tolstoy. It's called The Calendar of Wisdom. So the quote for today, September 15th, is from Arthur Schopenhauer, who was a German philosopher from the 19th century. And this quote really struck me this morning because I feel as if it gets to the heart of the mission of this project. In real life, illusions can only transform our life for a moment, but in the domain of thoughts and the intellect, misconceptions may be accepted as truth for thousands of years and make a laughingstock of whole nations, mute the noble wishes of mankind, make slaves from people and lie to them. These misconceptions are the enemies with which the wisest men in the history of mankind try to struggle. The force of the truth is great, but its victory is difficult. However, once you receive this victory, it can never be taken from you. Freeing a person from misconceptions, false truths, and lies does not take anything from him. It gives him something important. And if we can do that for just one audience member, I think we will have accomplished our goal. And if some of you don't realize, this is the 400th anniversary, such a weird word to say about this, but the beginning of slavery in the North America, basically, in the English colonies. And so they've started this work about 3 years ago, and they've been finding out a lot about our history here, and they're working on it more. And Rondalyn over here, Rondalyn Paris, is on that committee too, and she's more on the research side, and I joined the committee as someone to say, okay, you guys have researched these stories, and now we can tell these stories in a different way. We can tell these stories in a moving way, we can tell these stories with text, we can tell the stories with movement and things like that. So that's what this is inspired by, and it's pretty exciting, and I'm so glad you're all here. So why don't we quickly go around, say our name, and maybe what motivated you to come?
Okay, I'm Lydia Myers, and I'm just interested in this project. I think it's really special, especially to learn about where we go to school and the history behind it and ways that we can improve in the future.
I'm Rebecca Jernigan, and I'm a storyteller, and my friend Jen said, can you come and join this project? And of course, it is a project that is dear to our hearts, and trying to understand more about the situation.
My name is Rondalyn Pierce. I'm an Oxford native. I'm a former consultant for the Slavery Research Group, and I'm also a new graduate student in Southern Studies.
I'm Noah Greenwood. I'm also in one of Miss Jen's dance movement classes, and so I heard about what she was doing, and I thought it would be really cool. I'm new to the University of Mississippi, so I know we have a history, and I would just like to learn more about that.
I'm Emily Olson, and I've been a dancer my whole life, and my favorite part about dance is telling a story through it. So this project just seemed really special to me to get to tell the story of our university and just the things we've done.
My name is Chris Bierman. I'm also a dancer. I'm a prayer dancer at my church. I love to get inspired by other people about dancing because it feels a fire in me, and it feels that I want to know about the history of our slavery.
I'm Kaylin Sanders. I dance in a lot of different places. It just seems like a really good project to get into because I like to dance, and I think it's a really good way to tell the story.
I'm Elaine, and I'm attracted to dance. I'm attracted to performance art. I'm attracted to building community and to reconciliation and understanding and acknowledging our history.
Name and do my movement, and then Lydia will say her name and do a movement, and then we'll do hers, and then we'll do mine, then hers. So we come all the way around to Kaylin. Does that make sense? Okay, so it'll be fun. Right, I moved here from Columbus, Ohio, Jennifer. And I was a little nervous about moving to the South. And my very first semester, there was something that the university called the Beta Incident. And the Beta Incident was a particular fraternity kidnapped 4 freshman pledges, white students, white males, and they stripped them naked, bound and gagged them, and wrote on their bodies with black shoe polish racial epithets that I don't want to say. And then they dropped them off in the middle of the night at Rust College, which is a historically black institution, for the African American students at Rust College to find them on their campus. Completely naked, bound and gagged, yeah, in Holly Springs, just down the road. And that was like my introduction to Ole Miss. It was like, whoa. So ever since then, I've been very involved with a lot of racial reconciliation efforts on campus.
Something that as a faculty member at the University of Mississippi, I feel is a huge gap in terms of how to make the work that we do in terms of representations of slavery, representations that were considered difficult past, although all past are difficult. We tend to frame it this way when we're thinking about slavery and other forms of oppression. And I just think that it was really significant to have a project that was inclusive of young people, of other demographics in the community who were working to tell a story in a very diverse way. And as a faculty member, I think that sometimes we think about the work that we do in terms of historical research and then making it accessible in the ways that we know, especially in the humanities and social sciences. But when you have work through people like Jennifer Misenko, what you get is a variety of ways of expressing a story. And I think that was very key here. So I was very, very impressed with that, especially the dance aspect.
One of the persons that's also been with us from the beginning of that effort is Joseph McGill, who is founder of the Slave Dwelling Project. So he was walking around on campus while he was here in April and noticed fingerprints on Croft Hall and verified that those fingerprints were the fingerprints of the enslaved, because he had seen them in other buildings, and other archaeologists, cultural anthropologists, people who were scholars with the Slavery Research Group looked at those and found them to be true. So now one of the things I always point out about Croft is, even though we are literally standing in societies almost wholly built by enslaved labor, and almost every building of a certain age pays homage to the hard work that they did, from the bricks to the actual construction and architecture. We walk by it. It's history hidden in plain sight. We walk by it every day and don't even notice it. So what I try to do is get people to stop and look, to actually have a place where you can put your hand where their hands were, is amazing and is rare, maybe not so much because it doesn't exist, but because we rarely look for those things. So Croft is one of those places that once I take groups through and we talk about enslaved labor, then I say, oh, do you want to, Croft was built by them, but do you want to see where they actually touched it? Usually any imperfections or fingerprints would be put to the inside where they couldn't be seen on the face of the building, but there are several places on Croft where you can literally walk up and touch exactly where someone who was in slave labor, usually an enslaved child in brick making, would have touched that particular brick.
A lot of that work for me as an anthropologist has to come around race work, understanding how race works, and getting people to really think through that, really think through how we make race, how we perpetuate it, and as a result, how racism exists. And at a university level, I think that's where diversity conversations really come in. Right now, diversity is optional, and in order for it to work, it should never be. It should be an understood, embedded, and structural thing. We don't have that right now. So what I try to do, at least in my classes, is to, at a very basic level, get students to understand how race works. It's only a semester, but I do think that the university has the opportunity to do that for at least 4 years.
1, 2, 3.
Jennifer.
All right, your turn.
Lydia.
Whoa.
Okay, Rebecca.
Okay, Elaine.
Emily.
Chris.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So we gotta practice it.
Yeah.
From the top. Jennifer. Rebecca.
Rosalind.
Elaine.
Alicia.
Maggie.
Noah.
Emily.
Chris.
On my mother's side, and my mother was from West Tennessee, and her heritage, much of it is Irish. She was a McCool. They were, although at the time of the Civil War, her family, I believe they may have had 1 or 2 slaves, but they were not a big plantation of any sort. They were regular farming folks. On the Moore side, my great-grandfather, Sam Moore, was a slave owner and did have, I believe, I've been told by my father's one half-sister, who was born in 1876, that my great-grandfather did have a number of slaves, and they had, of course, most of the plantations were really working farms. So they had a working farm on the Pearl River in Mississippi, in central Mississippi.
So I know sometimes it's really hard to understand enslavement because it happened so long ago and people are like, I don't understand why it's so important. The price of an average field hand in today's dollars is $40,000. So what that means is for folks who came here, which this was a finishing school for the plantocracy elite, only opening in 1848 to white males, only 2 out of that first class of 180 some odd people had a family that owned less than 2 to 5 slaves.
Only what percent?
2, not a percent, 1, 2.
Oh.
Okay, so when we're talking about people, these are folks, including the trustees of the university, like James Ventress, who this hall is named after, had 100, 200 slaves. The average was 2 to 15 throughout the South. Large-scale slave owners were thought to own 80 or more. So if you do the math, we're talking about millionaires and billionaires off the backs of people who they did not pay, did not take the best care of, and exploited. There were 246 years of chattel slavery. Okay, chattel means they were treated like a horse, a cow, a chair. They were not people. In our Constitution, it says that slaves, or enslaved people, as I prefer to call them, were only 3/5 human.
So the idea here is we're starting here with our project is that we're opening the curtain behind what this symbol stands for. We're not trying to glorify the statue. We're saying this statue exists. It was created in this very grotesque glorification in the early 1900s. But what we want to do is reveal what's behind the curtain, so to speak.
I know the statue has to go because we won't have a welcoming environment at the university until it does. And we won't have peace until it does. And peace is something I care very much about.
Onto that rifle. Okay. Now can you take this shape and evolve it into the shape that you created just now?
I have been talking back and forth with my mom at home and some of my friends here about this experience, and the only word that came to mind right away was heavy. It was a very heavy feeling on my heart, and I felt just weighed down the whole night. It really weighed on me.
What I got out from it, it felt like somebody was guilty of doing this type of stuff to them, and it felt that I felt like a spirit going through the motion of going through that horrible scene about them in chains, and I felt the movement, like the civil rights movement, through that scene and through that empowerment. Like when I was born, people was telling me that I wasn't gonna make it, and once dancing got into my life, it just took all the fears away, and God gave me the passion and the confidence to go out and to dance.
Yeah, growing up, all the girls I typically liked were white, but that was just because I was around those people half the time, and so that's what I was just used to. And a lot of the girls that I liked weren't allowed to like me back because their fathers wouldn't let me. For instance, I had this best friend in the 9th grade, and we were like really good friends. Like, we would always text all the time. She was a cheerleader, I was on the football team. She would give me free tattoos I could put on my face and everything. We had a really good relationship for about like 2 months. And then like all of a sudden one day, she came to school and she would not like look at me. Like it's not even that she wouldn't talk to me, she wouldn't look at me. And that really bothered me. And like I didn't know what I did. And then so like this kept on happening for like 2 days straight, and finally I saw her in the hallway and I was like, hey, and like I had to like grab her and I'd be like, hey, like what did I do to you? Because I needed to know, like, because I had no idea what I did. And she just looked at me. I was like, are you okay? Did I do something wrong? And she was like, no, you didn't. And her like eyes like welled up with like tears or whatever. I was just like, okay. And so my mom ended up contacting her mom on Facebook, like mothers do. And she ended up contacting her and asking her what I did, because like they were trying to raise me to be a good man, and I need to like learn from my mistakes and whatever. And her mother came up with some kind of pitiful excuse like, oh, she didn't like the way he was texting her, or he was flirting with her too much, which I'm like, okay. But like the girl wouldn't look at me in the face. So obviously, we found out later, I actually found out later from her cousin that her parents like basically told her, if you ever look at him again, yeah.
You know, I guess we're all a little prejudiced to some degree in many places in our lives. I grew up with a bit of racism in my home, but I didn't like it. It didn't feel right. I knew everybody was human, and so I kept that feeling.
There was a story about, that I won't share in the narrative, but there was a story about the people who created Dixie, the Black Snowdens of Ohio. And both of them, the mother and the father, were sold away as children and brought as enslaved children into Ohio, which was a free state. Because if you were a slave in one state, you were it didn't matter that you went into a free state. Ask Dred Scott, it went all the way to the Supreme Court. Once you were enslaved, you were enslaved. And if you were free, then the paperwork had to be on you at all times. But anyway, to finish up, the girl was sent away from her mama on the eastern shore of Maryland at the age of 11. The father was equally young. He was like double the age when they got married. She was 17. And they had 6 kids. But I literally had to break down and cry when I tried to incorporate her story, because there was a letter from her mother. Her mother had dictated something. The people that owned the mother and the siblings also were relatives of the people that owned Ellen Cooper Snowden, the little 11-year-old enslaved black girl. So they still did correspond. I don't know if she ever saw her family again. But the mother is sending this letter from Maryland that she's dictated to somebody to write down. And it says lots of things about how she should behave so that she can be safe, because black mothers would tell their children how to behave so they could be safe. But also she asked, were there other black people in the neighborhood, so she could reestablish some kind of bond or network. And then and I'm gonna try not to break down here, when she talks about what's going on at the home place, the plantation in Maryland. She says, oh, you know, you got your cousin Lucinda who's sick. You've got your nephew from an older sibling who's growing up to be a really fine boy. But cousin Armenia was sold away and we ain't seen her since. And then she ties up this letter at the end to this 11-year-old child and says, we love you. And we wish, you know, love and the sincerest, you know, love I can give from all your kin. And I'm thinking about a mother who has an 11-year-old who was sold away, even though she knew where her child physically was, which all enslaved mothers did not. Can you imagine your younger sibling or cousin or anybody you know that's 11 years old? That's the distance between Maryland and Ohio from you, and you can't do nothing about it, and you're trying to reach out to her and steal her up. So if you don't ever see her again, she knows that she's loved and she's cared for and that you're praying for her. And I had to sit on my bed while I was typing. I had to stop and I had to cry because I can't imagine. I have a 7-year-old nephew. I can't imagine being able to do that.
This has really pushed me, and I'm sure everybody, out of our comfort zones a little bit to really challenge ourselves to get into the character and the mindset of what we need to look like for this to really be effective and impactful.
We don't know anything but her name. We do not know how old she was. We have not been able to find out what happened to her after enslavement. But the one thing that we do know, and the one reason why she even shows up in records, is actually for a bad reason. Okay, so in 1859, she was raped and beaten in Barnard Observatory.
I was at a dance audition for Ole Miss Student Dance, and Miss Jen was talking about it. And so I was talking to my mom and I was like, this seems like such a good opportunity. So I was like, I'm gonna do it because I don't know a whole lot about enslaved people, and I thought it'd be a good opportunity to learn more about it and to portray it in a way that I love. So.
You okay with that?
Yeah.
So we'll let her go. There. Yeah.
And we'll all just stand over her.
Sure.
When she said it, I was like, okay, all right. And then she was like, you have to play Jane. And I was like, oh, okay. Just like even during the rehearsals, it put a lot of things into perspective because I've never felt the way that I felt. I didn't know anything that had to do with enslaved people except the things that I've seen on TV. And when she told the story, all I felt was hurt, and I felt pain, and I couldn't believe the things that I were hearing, because who wants to do something like that?
Oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom. But before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Keep going, Celeste.
Like a motherless child, sometimes I feel like a motherless child.
You know, I was a little girl when all that happened. So I remember the chaos. I remember walking to school and the National Guard walking behind me to school in the morning, going and coming back, because I lived not far from the university. Matter of fact, over in the area where they're building the swimming pool now, where they're building a new school by the swimming pool. So we lived over in that area, and then my dad was big in civil rights, so I just remember living all of that, and the phone calls that came to him, and the threatening and that kind of stuff. So we were afraid, because it was a nightmare. It was very scary, and I didn't realize then that we were under martial law, but we really were, because we had military walking behind us to school and back and all around our school. It was just a real scary time.
By that time, people were taking stands one way or the other. There was probably a nucleus of maybe 25 or 30 faculty members who clearly were opposed to integration. I remember one professor saying, I left Nebraska to come to Mississippi so I would be in a conservative place, and now they've let a nigger in. A similar number who were left-wing liberals. And so we would meet and discuss and talked about things. For example, we would agree to walk along some of the dormitories at night.
When I went to this performance and then went to a performance that was like this in the spring when the conference was here on campus, I just feel like, first of all, it's very moving. And, as somebody who's a part of the College of Liberal Arts, coming from a sociological perspective, I really appreciate my colleagues and the way they come to the same kinds of difficult questions and difficult conversations with different kinds of tools and different perspectives. And I just think it's so powerful. So I would have to say, in a word, this performance was extremely powerful. It's not only bringing different perspectives to the topic of trying to grapple with a history of racial inequality, the reality of slavery and its connection to this university and many others in the country, but it's seeing students and young people from the community and older people from the community coming together, in this space to actually ask questions, find answers, come together. And so it's powerful.
In Dixieland, I'll take my stand to live and die in Dixie. Look away, look away, look away down south in Dixie. Look away, look away, look away down south in Dixie.
Can you look away from Dixie, that mythical place that seems to morph yet persist through all time and space, that labels slavery benign at its worst and benevolent at its best? The place where the South won the righteous war against Northern aggression, where the slaves were happy, segregation was natural and just, all while Americans were swearing that in God we trust. Can we truly shed the mythology that surrounds the lost cause ideology? Can we temper the temptation to couch heinous acts as heroism and tradition, or clad gore in gallantry and gentility? Look away. Look away, look away, Dixieland. Can we look Dixie in the past it represents squarely in the face and sit with the discomfort that surely awaits? Can we deal with the truth that abounds and become Southerners and Americans standing on new ground? Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. The only way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth on them, according to native North Mississippian Ida B. Wells, herself born enslaved just about 35 miles away from here in 1862.
I wish I was in Dixie, hooray, hooray. In Dixieland I'll take my stand to live and die in Dixie. Look away, way down south in Dixie. Look away, way down south in Dixie.
Fortunes were made, and the majority of the populace was enriched in one way or another by their labor and value as a commodity. They were traded and sold on Wall Street in New York City, at Gadsden's Wharf in Charleston, South Carolina, in the French Quarter of New Orleans, and on the steps of the Lafayette County Courthouse on the square in Oxford, Mississippi. We pass by their contributions to our country every day. Where are their monuments? As Americans, we like our foundational myths because they comfort us. Our memories, histories, and stories often exclude the enslaved from our societies, which simply could not exist without them. This exclusion leads to erasure, rendering their labor, exploitation, and sacrifice invisible, especially in public places. Historian Mickey McElligott goes a step beyond in asserting that the myth of the happy and faithful slave lingers because so many Americans have wished to live in a world in which African Americans are not angry over past and present injustices, a world in which white people were and are not complicit, in which the injustices themselves of slavery, Jim Crow, and ongoing structural racism seem not to exist at all. Seminal text in Black women's studies penned in the 1980s boldly proclaims the unique position of erasure that Black women face in the United States in its title. All the women are white, all the blacks are men, but some of us are brave. Enslaved women and girls bore the brunt of sexual violence and daily assaults against their bodily autonomy and integrity. They worked as hard as men, but were exploited for sport, the pleasure of others, and to produce additional property. The story of Jane here at the university bears a poignant testimony of the struggles of Black women during enslavement. In 1859, student S.B. Humphreys crept into Barnard Observatory, which served in part as the chancellor's residence. Chancellor Bernard and his wife were away. Humphreys raped and severely beat Jane, so much so that marks could still be seen 2 months later on her body. Bernard's attempt to expel Humphreys and the response from the white male elite in Oxford became known as the Burn Affair. She was courageous enough to name her attacker. The whites were angered that the word of an enslaved woman was taken against a white man. Jane, the enslaved woman who we only know because of her pain. We don't know if it was the first time she was assaulted this way, but I pray it was the last. For in 6 years, the legal end of enslavement would come to pass. To us, you are still a mystery that slipped in and out of history. Hashtag Black Lives Matters. Hashtag Me Too. Hashtag Say Her Name. Her name was Jane.
And go home to my Lord and be free.
Here on these grounds, on September 30th, 1962, James Meredith was a 29-year-old Air Force veteran from Kosciuszko, Mississippi. He integrated the University of Mississippi only after being denied entry twice and a lengthy court battle that saw Governor Ross Burnett charged with civil contempt, fined $10,000, and slated to be arrested if Meredith was not enrolled by October 2nd. The night-long riot of September 30th, also called the American Insurrection, produced serious damage to property and 2 deaths. However, history could no longer be delayed. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning, and so it was. On October 1st, 1962, after the federalized Mississippi National Guard restored order, U.S. Marshals escorted him into the Lyceum to enroll. He graduated with a degree in political science on August 18, 1963. This monument was unveiled to commemorate this historic moment October 1, 2006. In February 2014, a noose was put around the statue's neck, a lynching in effigy. The struggle continues.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Though we venerate this place as a university, a place of higher learning and thought, it was also a plantation. Out of the dozens or more likely hundreds of enslaved people who toiled for the university at one time or another, we have only been able to recover 9 names so far. We call their names now as a way to honor their humanity and thank them for their service. George, Harrison, Henry, John, Moses, Nathan, Squash, Will, and last but by far not the least, Sister Jane.
To break every chain, break every chain, break every chain. To break every chain, break every chain, break every chain. To break every chain, break every chain, break every chain.